Out of the U.S. presidential race. Joe Biden abandons his re-election bid and backs his Vice President Kamala Harris. But what's behind this move? And will it energize the Democratic base ahead of November's election? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. It's a historic move and a big political gamble. Joe Biden has dropped out of the U.S. presidential race after weeks of mounting pressure for him to step aside. That leaves the Democratic Party with just a few months to reorganize its strategy and re-energize its base. For some, Vice President Kamala Harris is the obvious choice. But some Democrats are questioning if she can beat Donald Trump. So where does this leave the Democratic Party? Will the shakeup sway any independent voters? We'll explore these issues with our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Katia Lopez-Hodayan.
A historic moment in American politics. With U.S. President Joe Biden out of his re-election campaign, his party is rushing to build a new plan, including who will lead the Democratic ticket in November.
God bless the United States of America.
Biden is supporting Vice President Kamala Harris, but she's not the official nominee yet. The former California prosecutor is looking to lock in enough delegate votes to secure her nomination at the Democratic convention next month.
Do we believe in freedom? Do we believe in opportunity? Do we believe in the promise of America?
The change has re-energized the Democratic base, but doubts linger. Harris had low voter approval ratings in her first years as VP. Her party is now looking at whether she can turn things around and beat Donald Trump, particularly in swing states.
I think her likely nomination will put Democrats in a strong position. She will be very competitive in those crucial Midwestern states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And I think she also will put some of those other swing states that have started to slip away, places like Arizona, back in very strong contention for Democrats.
Some voters have mixed reactions.
I hope they look at the person and not just she's a woman and she's a woman of color. I look at her record and how she worked with Joe Biden.
I'm not thrilled because I feel like in some ways it will be more of the same. However, I do think it's a positive direction for the party.
Abroad, there are questions about how the shakeup and the candidates could affect the war on Gaza, Ukraine, and tensions with China.
They know Kamala owns this failed record.
Trump's team has already released ads attacking Harris's record, including her handling of the southern U.S. border crisis.
Look what she got done. A border invasion, runaway inflation, the American dream dead.
Now that Biden is out of the race, 78-year-old Trump is the oldest presidential nominee in U.S. history. Despite his legal troubles, his recent assassination attempt has re-energized his base.
I think Trump is the man for the hour, but I feel like America is standing on its feet again. We're bleeding, but we're standing up.
Now, with less than 4 months before the presidential election, the parties and voters must navigate politically uncertain territory. Katia Lopez-Hodayan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our guests. They're all joining us from Washington, D.C. Steve Herman is the chief national correspondent for Voice of America and the author of the book Behind the White House Curtain, a senior journalist story of covering the president and why it matters. A. Scott Bolden is a former chair of the Washington, D.C. Democratic Party and current chairman of the National Bar Association Political Action Committee, which raises and distributes funds for political candidates. And also with us is veteran Democratic Party insider James Zogby. He's advised the presidential campaigns of Jesse Jackson, Al Gore, Barack Obama, and Bernie Sanders. He's also held leadership roles within the party. A warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining us today on Inside Story. Scott, let me start with you today. How much of a boost does Joe Biden dropping out of the race give to the Democrats going forward? How much more energized is the base now? And what does this do when it comes to upending the race?
Super boost, super energy. All the leaks in the Democratic Party that is manifested in the various polls over the last 3 to 6 months are all cured by him stepping aside. It also takes away the issue of age and mental acuity, which is a huge issue to the Republicans. All of these leaks with young people, black and brown people, pro-life, suburban women, independents, right? It all manifests itself in the polling numbers. With him stepping aside, she's not, Kamala Harris is not Joe Biden, and it cures all the defects. And so you see overnight she raised $50 million. I think that coalition that Biden-Harris had 4 years ago is going to come back together, coalesce around her, and you're going to see her not only get close to Donald Trump, but I think beat Donald Trump in these polls in the next 4 to 6 weeks,
and Scott,
after the convention.
Yeah, and Scott, you mentioned the age factor and how much it's played in the campaign thus far. You know, Trump and his team, they've been making Biden's age a big issue in their campaign. Now that Biden is out of the race, you know, Trump is 78 years old. He is now the oldest presidential nominee in U.S. history. So how much does this turn the tables?
Well, I think it turns the table in a couple of ways. One, he's a convicted felon, and Kamala Harris is a prosecutor. She can prosecute the case, the political case, and the economic case against Donald Trump and his retribution efforts that he's promised. So it changes the dynamic there. She's much younger than him, much more dynamic than him, and the party is going to be not only energized, but the Republicans, they focused on running against Joe Biden. He's no longer there now. And their attacks on Kamala Harris as an African-American woman, as someone who's been battle-tested as the vice president, changes the whole dynamic. And you'll see that Trump and the GOP now are going to be on their heels and trying to figure out what the best message is. If they attack her on economics and stuff, we can have that conversation about the economy, the lowest unemployment in probably 50 to 60 years or more. We can have that conversation about the stock market. We can have that conversation about inflation that's downward trending right now. And so we're on even footing there. And we like that debate if you're a Democrat and you're Kamala Harris.
James, in the past few weeks, there's been so much reporting about what President Biden has been thinking, the kind of pressure that he was under from Democratic colleagues after his disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump. I want to ask you about what it was that finally convinced Biden he needed to drop out. I mean, how excruciating a decision was this for him?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. I'm not privy to the president's thinking, but certainly there was enormous pressure, and there was a drip, and it wasn't going to get any less of a drip. It probably was going to increase in the coming days to a pretty much a rapid flow. But key people, like Speaker Pelosi, for example, coming out as she did, the lack of support from the congressional minority leader, who simply didn't say, we're endorsing you, but left it open. And Schumer, I think, was pretty tough as well. So the deck was stacked. The cards were getting stacked against him. How difficult is it? It has to be difficult. Look, he's 81 years old. This has been his entire life. To have to make the decision to step aside, for a guy to say, look, I just don't have what it takes to run right now. That's a tough call. I'm 78. I'm not 81. But frankly, when people tell me you're not able to do this, I wax indignant and I say that sure I can, even though I may not be able to. So I think that there really was a lot of personal stuff here. But frankly, he was in a position to, after the debate in particular, he was going to lose. It just wasn't looking good. Their denial to the contrary that, oh, yes, he can do it. And yes, we're going to win. And the numbers are all on our side. Simply reality was telling a very different story. So he made the right decision. I wish he'd done it a month ago. I think it would have given us more time to prepare. But here we are. I think Kamala Harris is well positioned to mobilize the various component groups in the party, and it's now going to be up to her to be able to do that. I've been pushing for an open convention. I think it would be better for her. I think it would be better for the party. if we had a bit of a mini primary contest. She said she wants to earn and win the nomination. I'd give her a chance to win it by having an open primary with town halls. And we have 2-3 weeks before the convention where we actually could do a whole lot to showcase our bench and have her emerge as the victor of that process.
James, let me just ask you about these next steps you're talking about. The official selection of a nominee, as I understand it, it has to be made by thousands of Democratic National Convention delegates. Are those delegates now going to coalesce around Harris? I mean, whether there is this open and transparent sort of process that you are recommending, is it now the fact that everybody's going to be coming around Harris going forward? And how does this selection process by the delegates actually happen?
Well, what's going to happen is that the states are going to meet. The states are going to take votes. Scott, who was my chair here a while back, knows this process better than anyone. And the states will release their votes at a roll call. It'll either happen on the floor of the convention or the party wants to do it weeks earlier, just in like a week and a half. I think they want to do a virtual roll call. That's how it'll happen. Now, will people say that they all support Kamala Harris? Of course, I think that they most likely will. There may be some voting present who have one reason or another dissatisfaction, but the overwhelming majority will be supportive. The question is, how enthusiastic will that support be? And we were seeing a situation where Democrats were supporting Joe Biden, but 57 to 66% in different polls were saying they wish he weren't the nominee. We haven't seen those numbers with regard to Kamala Harris, but look, there's no secret to say that Democrats have different positions on things, and some may not be enthusiastic. It's up to her right now to create the enthusiasm that will actually be masked by a coming together and everybody saying, oh, yes, we support Kamala. But are they going to work hard? Are they going to make this real? Is the threat of Donald Trump enough to move them the way we need to move them to get the hard work done, to get the votes out? That's going to be up to her. I think she can do it. She says she wants to earn it. I think she has the capacity to do it. We just have to have, I think, a process that allows her to show her stuff and win this in a convincing enough way that people say she did it and we're going to be fully behind her.
Steve, I just want to zoom out for a minute and talk about how seismic a shift this all is, because the last time that an incumbent president stepped aside from the presidential race, that was in 1968. That's when President Lyndon B. Johnson decided against running for re-election. But of course, that happened in March of that year. We're now much closer to the convention than Johnson was in 1968. We're just weeks away from the Democratic National Convention. How big of a political earthquake is this?
Well, as you pointed out there, this is unprecedented, and the Democrats really need to move fast, as James was explaining there. There has to be some sort of process to really unify the party, because if we just go back a few days, there were voices on social media, progressives and others in the Democratic Party, who really were against this movement to pressure Joe Biden to pass the torch. They were calling it a bloodless coup in the making. And they may come around for Kamala Harris, but time is running out. So we'll know after the election whether this worked or not, or Joe Biden will say, I told you so, and other Democrats will say, you know, this was the right thing to do. It's all going to depend on what are the results in November.
Steve, we know that after his debate performance, Biden tried very hard to try to sort of reset the narrative, insisting that he was going to stay in the race. He thought that certainly giving some interviews and maybe giving some stump speeches, that NATO press conference, that perhaps that would change the tide. But that didn't happen. Was there anything that Biden could have done that would have won back potential voters after that debate?
It's difficult to say, but it does appear that debate performance was a fatal flaw for his candidacy. He was defiant, as you mentioned. He had said at one point in an interview that it would take intervention from the almighty above to convince him to drop out of the race, or he had to be shown poll numbers that would convince him that he could not win. We know that Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader, went up to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware on Saturday to talk with him and apparently delivered the message that Nancy Pelosi and others in the days ahead were going to make very blunt public calls for him to drop out, and it would be better for him to go out as a hero this way. And I expect he will appear at the Democratic Party's national convention in Chicago during the week of August 19th. And we will see an enthusiastic crowd giving him an unprecedented ovation, as opposed to if he had stayed in the race, there would have, who knows what would have happened at the convention.
Scott, we know that there's going to be a lot of meetings, rules committees of the Democratic National Convention. They had been planning for this virtual roll call that would have happened and basically picked formally the nominee for the Democratic Party, that they weren't even going to wait until the convention. That was all supposed to be sewn up by, I believe, August 7th. That's what James was saying. I mean, is that still the plan of action going forward? Are things going to proceed by this timeline still?
Well, the short answer is yes. The Rules Committee, the Credentials Committee, all these committees, they're meeting to set up the convention, but these are standing committees. That's the first thing. Second of all, I think in a week or two, they're scheduled to do a roll call, but a lot of that is probably going to depend on how the Democrats coalesce around Kamala Harris. I wish we had time to do a mini primary, but you got to have a competition. And right now, there's no real competition. I mean, Joe Manchin said this morning that he wasn't going to run. Major leaders in the party have gotten behind her. Representatives and senators have gotten behind her. There are coalitions of civil rights organizations and human rights organizations have gotten behind her because the Democrats understand how critical it is to beat Donald Trump and that that democracy is on the line. And if that's the case, then we spent a month or so fighting ourselves over Joe Biden. We don't have time to fight anybody but the GOP and Donald Trump right now. And so if we can coalesce around her, around Kamala Harris, and she's the nominee, it won't be a coronation. Remember, she's part of the Biden-Harris team. She's been campaigning. She's got $200 million in the bank. She does fundraising, right? She's the vice president. It's real easy for her just to move up, pick a vice president, and let those delegates vote. Because remember, now that Biden is not in the race, they're all uncommitted now. And so as a result, she's got to earn it by getting them to support her. That's not if you got competition, that's fine. But it doesn't look like there's going to be much competition because there's not much time left.
James, so there's been polling the past few weeks indicating that Kamala Harris would perhaps do better against Trump than Biden would have. As I understand it, those are national polls. Have there been specific polls focusing on battleground swing states?
Not yet. That's been it's been a hypothetical. So the national polls are out. The state by state polls are not. We'll actually be doing one. My brother John will be doing one in the next week or so. Now that we have some clarity to who the nominee is, we held off because we didn't want to do Biden. We weren't sure he was going to stay. But I think she will do better. I think she'll do better in several states because many of the negatives that had come to plague Joe Biden, for example, his age and the debate performance, and then the equally disastrous interview with George Stephanopoulos that was supposed to allay fears but actually created more. And I think Gaza, which has been a drain on the president, not only in terms of Arab voters in Michigan, but also in terms of Black, Latino, Asian, young people, where you were seeing 15, 20% attrition and people saying that it was Gaza that was causing them to drop off. Now, the vice president has been far more empathetic on Palestinian issues. We'll see how she frames that in the weeks to come. But some of the negatives around Joe Biden aren't there with Kamala Harris, and I think she will most likely do better in the state-by-state pollings than the president. So I'm optimistic about that, but I think and I think what Scott is saying, there's a very short period of time. She's got work to do. I think she's up for the job, but she's really got to get that. She's got to mobilize people around her as not the number two, but the number one.
And James, I'm glad you mentioned that because I wanted to dig a little deeper with you specifically about Biden's policies towards Israel and his stance on the war on Gaza. I mean, you had a lot of polling indicating that Biden was hemorrhaging Arab American and Muslim American voters due to his support of Israel. I'd like you to talk to our viewers a little bit more about the kind of data that you found, how dire the situation has been for President Biden, especially in states like Michigan.
Well, what we found was that, 59% of Arab American voters voted for him in 2020. The number was down to 18% now. And I think that was not going to go up. It most likely was going to go down. He was in a very bad situation there. But we also found in national polling that we did of the broad constituency of the Democratic Party that, like I said, he was losing young voters. He was losing Black and Asian voters in particular, who have a global vision, who see themselves as part of a world community, and who felt strongly that the president was failing on that score. So this was a problem that Democrats had to deal with. They were not always as acknowledging of the problem, but clearly, when I've spoken with the vice president and people in her team, they get it. And I think we'll see far more empathy from her and hopefully a change in policy. She's still the vice president. She's not the president until she wins the election. So she will still be Joe Biden's number two. But as number two, she can send different signals. She can send different messages about how open she is to change. And without contradicting the president, she can let people know, I understand. And I think she will.
Steve, Vice President Harris has already gotten a lot of endorsements, big political endorsements from very powerful figures in the Democratic Party. But there has been some Democrats that have wondered aloud why perhaps figures like former President Obama and Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, why they have not publicly endorsed her. Is that simply because they want it to be left to Joe Biden to endorse Kamala Harris and that they will eventually do so? Or does that represent any political peril going forward for Kamala Harris?
It does not appear to represent any political peril. It's more about their concerns with the process and talking, as we were, about whether there's going to be a conference call, roll call vote of the delegates, a mini primary, or a vote on the floor of the Democratic National Convention. And I expect that Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, once that is resolved, will come out and not only endorse Kamala Harris, but that we will see Barack Obama, maybe Bill Clinton, and others out on the campaign trail. And what this really boils down to, however, is, whatever Donald Trump says about Kamala Harris or whatever Kamala Harris says about Donald Trump is not going to move voters over from one column to the other. It's about getting your base out. And in these critical swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, that's where the work really needs to be done by the Democrats if they have any hopes of winning the election.
Steve, if I could also ask you, how difficult a needle was it for Harris's team to thread the past few weeks to be supportive publicly of Biden, to not leak any potential succession plans, but also to be ready when and if Biden were to step aside, which he did?
It seems like they did an excellent job on that. And part of that we know from the poll reporters that travel with the vice president. Usually she comes back to the plane and will talk to the journalists on Air Force Two, usually off the record. But that did not happen on the last two trips. They were anticipating something could happen, like happened on Sunday, but they did not want to be seen to leaning in towards pushing Joe Biden aside.
Scott, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to ask you about something that everybody is saying is going to be of paramount importance going forward for Vice President Harris, which is going to be picking her running mate, because there are a lot of Democrats that have privately argued that Harris should pick a white man in order to widen her appeal and provide demographic balance to the ticket. There is this belief that perhaps somebody like Josh Shapiro, who's the governor of Pennsylvania, because that's a critical Midwestern swing state. I mean, what do you think of that? How much concern is there right now about how she picks somebody that will bring in the kinds of crucial voters that some Democratic strategists think she needs?
Hey, I don't believe in identity politics, at least picking someone black, white, yellow, or brown. She needs that is going to help her win, help the Democrats win, and be a complement to her strong leadership, her resume. Very, very important. And so a governor of one of the swing states would be excellent, regardless of what their race or nationality is, because wherever we need strength is in those swing states. We've got to repair that blue wall. And once we repair that blue wall, then I think the vice president has to be the selection that's going to help us do that. Because we got time. We don't have a lot of time, but there's time. I think you're going to see the energy of the Democrats, and then you're going to see her pull closer and closer to Donald Trump and even beyond Donald Trump, because all the issues or negative energy that was causing the Democrats to leak support in voters, that her selection cures all of that. And so that's what I think.
All right, fascinating conversation, but unfortunately we have run out of time, so we're going to have to end it there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Steve Herman, A. Scott Bolden, and James Zogby. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.